Welcome to the Crimson Engine. My name is 𝙍𝙁𝙄𝙄𝙄. Today we are looking at the new Canon R7. Is it the B or C camera that Canon cinema shooters have been waiting for? Let's find out. So a couple of weeks ago now, Canon launched the R7. It is, along with the R10, their latest foray into the mirrorless world and their first 35mm sensor mirrorless camera. All of their mirrorless still cameras previously have been full frame. The R, the RP, the R5, and the R3 are all full frame. And that means you're spending a lot of money on the sensor and not as much on the processor, because the sensor is over half the cost of the camera. So by making it a smaller Super 35 sensor, you're able to get more bang for your buck when it comes on the processing power of the cameras. I'm not going to talk about the R10 today because it is just HD and doesn't have C-Log, but the R7 has 4K, C-Log, and a bunch of other little features that actually make it pretty useful as a cinema camera. No recording limit. So a lot of people who have the C70 or C300, C500 or the R5C are looking at the R7 to see if this could be a cheap B or C camera. So say you're shooting an interview, you have your main A camera that's filming the person's head, and you want a second camera, a second cutaway that you're only going to use for 10% of the time, or an establishing shot, or basically to cut around mistakes in the person's speech or the person's movement. You only need it there. You don't want to spend another $4,500 or $5,500 or $15,000 on another cinema camera. Can you get away with the R7 as a B camera? Let's assume you're finishing in 4K, so you at least need 4K, and you want to match the R7 with your cinema camera. Are you able to do that? Without having the camera and testing it, I can't give a definitive answer, but I can certainly say that the R7 has all of the ingredients that would make a good cinema camera, with a couple of exceptions. Let's go through the positives first. It's 4K, you can shoot C-Log, so in theory, you should match somewhere in the dynamic range and somewhere in the color science of your R5C, C70, R5. It doesn't have timecode in, so you won't be able to use your timecode generators to match the footage, but it does have audio in, and you can use something like a tentacle sync, which inputs your timecode over the audio track, and you just use the Tentacle Sync app to get that digital audio timecode and match it in post. So timecode isn't insurmountable. We did this with the C200 very successfully for a long time, so I don't think the lack of timecode in is a big enough barrier. Yes, the sensor is Super 35, so it's not the ideal camera to shoot a wide shot if your main camera, like the R5C or C500, is full frame, but you can get around that by using a wider lens, by potentially using the Canon 0.7 speed booster, though there's no word yet whether or not that will be compatible, meaning it will send lens data between the lens and the R7. There is a great RF 16mm lens, which is almost a pancake. So on the R7, it's going to be the equivalent of something like a 20mm on a full frame. So you are going to be able to get a very nice wide shot and still use autofocus, still use shallow depth of field. I think the 16mm are f2. You're going to have the LP batteries, which are interchangeable with the R5C and the R5. You have a micro HDMI out, which is the same as the R5C, so nothing that hasn't been handled there before. I would say the biggest limitation and downside of using the R7 as a cinema camera is the codec. It's the H.265, the same codec that's on the R5, not the R5C, but the R5. I found it very difficult to work with. It sort of is very processor intensive. It's very compressed, so using it in your Premiere or Final Cut or Resolve, there is lots of drive activity as it uncompresses and recompresses the file as you scrub through it. And I actually found it harder to work with than 8K RAW. It was more processor intensive. It was slower, at least on my 2019 iMac, than the 8K RAW coming off the R5 and the R5C. Now, there are ways around this. You could just batch recompress all your files over to something like ProRes 422. but it does slow you down. It is one more thing you have to do. The huge advantage of the XFAV-C codec, the 10-bit XFAV-C codec on the R5C is that it is almost indistinguishable from the raw files in terms of quality, but it's much smaller and it's compressed in such a way as that editors, the editing programs really like it, and it's smooth to use, it's smooth to work with. It doesn't cause those delays, it doesn't cause those processor intensive things. So without having seen the R7 footage side by side with R5C footage or C70 footage, I can't say definitively if it will match and be a good B camera, but I suspect since color science is pretty consistent across all of the Canon cinema range, it will look pretty good. And it will be a much better match than a Blackmagic camera, Sony camera, something from another brand with another color science that you then have to match in. I'm planning on getting my hands on one because I'd like to do this test properly. I suspect that it's being a stills camera, it's probably going to match the sharpness of the R5C and R5 better than it'll match the Super 35 sensor footage of the C70, but that remains to be seen. If you have one of those other cinema cameras, definitely check out Canon Masterclass. I have a ton of courses up there to help you better utilize your camera and get the best footage possible from it. I have detailed courses for the R5C, the R5, the C70, C500 Mark II, and C300 Mark III. Also a ton of courses on lighting ratios, shooting outdoor cinematography, finding clients using social media, managing your gear, and everything you need to run a successful production company in 2022. You can buy the courses individually, or you can stream the entire site for just $15 a month. Check it out at canonmasterclass.com. Hopefully that helps someone out there. I will report back when I have more information on the practicality of the R7 as a B or C camera for the cinema range. You can check out the description for links. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next time.